Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the first episode of our new podcast, Sumo Night in America. This is Michael. I'll be one of your hosts. We're very excited and thankful that you're listening with us today.
I'm Will. I'm the other host of Sumo Night in America. We're really excited to start this podcast. We thought about this podcast. We've been thinking about it for about a month or so. We thought the podcast platform was the best way to learn about sumo because, we could engage with a lot of people that may also be learning about sumo, and we can just kind of really deep dive into the sport that really intrigues us.
So going into introductions, my name is Michael. I'm a just recently out of college grad office guy. I've been following sumo for just about over a year now. I first got acquainted with sumo from actually a YouTube recommended video. It was a video of Tochino Shin in the May 2019 tournament when he got 10 wins. Just watching that really got me interested in the spectacle and the whole sport. I thought it was really awesome, and I got more into it from then. In sumo, obviously, my favorite things, I really like Tochino Shin. I think Terry Tsuyoshi's big salt throws are really awesome as well. And right now, I'm focusing on Asanoyama, Kota Shoho, and Hoshoryu's growth. I think they're really impressive upcoming prospects. Historically, one of my favorite wrestlers is Chiyo no Fuji.
And again, my name is Will. I'm a grad student who's studying Japanese history. I lived in Japan for a year, and that really kind of sparked my interest in all things Japanese. Michael actually introduced me to sumo when I got back from Japan, and the tradition and the kind of individual character aspect of the sumo wrestler really caught me. Some of my favorite things so far in sumo are Koto Eko, Ryuden, my boy Takayasu's back hair, and really intense meetings at the very beginning of sumo, which we call tachiais. I'm watching Tobizaru and Koto Shoho, and my favorite wrestler historically is Akebono. So Michael, now that we've introduced ourselves, I want you to go a little bit into what sparked the podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, a big thing was definitely, you're a big podcast weeb, you really follow podcasts, and we both really like sumo. But on a more serious note, me and Will, we're the type of guys who really will get into long-winded conversations. I'll stop by his room. We're roommates, by the way. I'll stop by the room and, go for, a 5-minute conversation. And eventually, I'll look at the clock and an hour has passed. So we're the type of guys who can, talk for a long-ass time without even thinking about it.
Yeah, Michael, I gotta say, the first couple times that you came to my room and you were really trying to get me into sumo, felt like you were trying to almost give me a pitch. You were trying to find someone else that you could talk sumo with. And after a while, you convinced me, and then I started seeking out sumo things on my own, and it just got to a point where I felt like I was highly anticipating, the next tournament and then I was starting to pick favorites, and I was starting to get almost, invested into the sport. And this podcast is just another kind of longer, more detailed kind of entry point for me.
Yeah, I mean, a couple months ago, I had to be like, "Hey, man, you watched Day 5 yet?" But look where we are now.
Yeah, and I'm just sitting in the bathroom at my work watching YouTube videos of sumo on my breaks. It's just something where I couldn't just not watch it. I had to watch something sumo every day. And so this podcast is going to be a great opportunity for me to learn more, and hopefully it'll inspire our listeners to really get into the sport, because I think it's one of my favorite parts about Japanese culture, and just generally, it's one of my favorite sports.
So, Will, we introduced ourselves, but obviously this is a sumo podcast. What are we going to be talking about?
Yeah, so we're really going to be talking about all things sumo. We're going to be talking about the wrestlers. We're going to be talking about the strategies they use to win a sumo match. We're going to be talking about the results and the effects of those results. And we'll get more into this episode of why the results of a sumo match, of one single sumo match, are so important. We're also going to be talking about general form and our impressions of how these sumo wrestlers have been doing lately. And that's going to be the main segments of our podcast. That's kind of where we're going to start the conversation. Mm-hmm. We're also going to be making segments every week to kind of break down different parts of sumo so that you can get a more broader introduction or a broader continuance of your knowledge about this sport. We're going to be having 3 segments. The first segment is going to be about sumo history, and that segment's going to be called Time is a Dohyo. We're also going to be covering kind of the gossip and the news in the sumo world. What's going on currently within different sumo stables. And we'll talk about what sumo stables are in our next segment. And that segment's going to be called Inside the Stable. Lastly, we're going to be kind of having spotlights on current wrestlers, so you can maybe find an entry point into becoming a fan of a wrestler or two. And we're going to be calling that the Mawashi Deep Dive.
Great. Awesome. And so that's going to be how our podcast is structured in terms of segments and sections.
What's the schedule of our podcast, Michael?
Yeah, the schedule of our podcast. So we're going to be trying to post weekly on Mondays, so you can expect a podcast Monday every day to anywhere you can listen to podcasts. Please note that this is Monday Pacific Standard Time. That's the West Coast of the United States. So if you live on the other side of the world, you might expect it on Tuesday. You might expect it at a later time if you're on the East Coast, so on and so forth. During the Bashos, we're going to be trying to upload daily with recaps, match impressions, and, along with the tournament, we're going to be doing lots of stuff with that. So predictions, mid-tournament recaps, instant reactions, that sort of thing.
Now, when you say prediction, I'm thinking betting. Are we going to do some betting on this podcast?
Look, I'm not saying I'm going to do it with viewers because I'm not a betting man, but I know Will is, so I'll humor him. I've already won $10 from him.
Okay, let's not talk about that. Anyways, we're also going to be doing some pre- and post-Basho special episodes, and these special episodes are really going to center kind of our conversations and what you might be looking for going ahead into the tournament, and then kind of getting a recap and maybe feeling more settled about the end of the tournament.
Great.
All right, Michael. Now we're kind of going to get into the meat of our episode here. I think in a first episode of any podcast that I've listened to, me being a podcast weeb, I've always found that the most successful podcasts kind of center the topic and almost give you a hook into why you should be watching it. So I'll start by asking you, what is sumo to you, and why should our listeners watch it?
To me, sumo, I'm a big sports guy. I like NBA, that's basketball, National Football League, college football. Even if I don't watch other sports, I'll play the games because I find sports, fascinating. And to me, like sumo, in a nutshell, is the most dynamic and entertaining 15 seconds at a time of any sport. In a match, the first person to touch the ground or step outside of the ring is the loser, and the winner gets all the spoils. And so to me, sumo is just a concentration of just like pure, what is it called? Tension.
Sumo's like lightning in a bottle.
Right.
But then you get that lightning in 20 matches a night for 15 straight days.
Yeah.
And, sumo is really, if you think of, for, Americans listening to this, sumo is almost like a constant rerun of, in football when you get the snap and it goes to the quarterback.
Yeah.
That like offensive line, just a collision of two huge bodies using as much force or skill as they can to win the matchup. But instead, it's in a ring with a bunch of people watching, and that one matchup for 15 seconds, almost, dictates your livelihood and how well that you do in your career. It's like 15 seconds at a time.
Right. And, another thing about it, too, like just the structure of competitions. One tournament in sumo is 15 days. In the top two divisions, 15 matches for each wrestler. If you win, if you have a winning record, you'll get promoted. If you have a losing record, you'll get demoted. Higher ranks means more money. Every single day is important. I liken it to like a shortened college football, high school college football season. In high school college football, one loss for the top contenders means you're out of the running. It's the same in sumo.
Well, and this is not the NBA. This is not the U.S. Senate. You can't just coast on your skill or your nomination or your contract over 10 years. If you rise through the ranks and then you start losing, you go back down. You have to almost, show consistent excellence to be considered the top wrestler in your sport. Very few wrestlers can coast on a couple years worth of performances for 10 years like in a lot of other sports. They have to stay in top form, they have to stay fit, and they have to stay winning year in and year out.
Yeah, and just like as an example for newer viewers, right now, like the best guy, his name's Hago. He's the best sumo wrestler
He's a beast.
of all time. Uh, for a normal wrestler in the top division, and like this is the cream of the crop, getting double-digit wins in a 15-day tournament, that might happen on on two handfuls. You could count on two hands their whole career. Hakuho, the past 14 years since 2006, he hasn't. When he's finished a tournament, he's never been below double-digit wins.
And here's the thing: he makes it look easy. I know it's not effortless, but it almost seems effortless the way that he, can control a huge, almost 400-pound body in front of him and move it wherever he wants at whatever, style or whatever pace he wants.
Right. And so Hakuho is a prime example of a guy. He loses one match, he loses two matches. That's the tournament for him. That could cost him the championship, which is what he's going for. But, sumo isn't all about, these top flight guys who are only winning for the cup. Going even just for a positive record is a big thing for guys in the rank and file.
Yeah, if you go 8-7 because there's 15 matches in a tournament, you're moving up a rank, even if it's only just one rank or two ranks. So this is also a sport, we've been talking and hammering at the point where you have to be great. But if you want to keep moving up, you can just be, mediocre or be successful to kind of a standard level to keep moving up. Now, there is this distinction. Once you start kind of on the bottom rungs of whatever your division, you can go 8-7 and 8-7 to move up. But Michael, can you tell us a little bit about what it takes to go from an average wrestler at kind of a mid-tier rank to be at the highest level of the sport?
Yeah, so just starting at the very top division, you can get 8-7, 9-6, the very bare minimum. Winning records in Japanese is called a kachikoshi. If you get those very bare minimum winning records, you can get all the way up to Maegashira 1. And so Maegashira, that's the rank and file. This is like the bottom level of the top division. Usually it'll be Maegashira 16 to 1, with 16 being the lowest and 1 being the highest.
And the highest amount of wrestlers are in that rank and file, right?
Exactly. If you're a Maegashira 16, you're at the lowest rank of top division. But that's the top 40 sumo wrestlers in professional sumo. You're
and basically in the world. Because
in the world.
Japan, also something that we're going to be talking about in our podcast, and something you may not know or you may already know, Japan is the epicenter of this sport. Now, sumo is a culturally Japanese sport, yet we'll talk about the international, not just flavor, but the international kind of bedrock that's within the sport. But, Japan is the epicenter of this sport. And if you are a top 40 wrestler in sumo in Japan, you are a top sumo wrestler in the world.
Yeah. And, going off that, we were talking about the Maegashira rank. After Maegashira, there's a couple ranks. It's called Sanyaku. And so this is the cream of the crop. This is above the Maegashira. There's 3 ranks. Komusubi, Sekiwake, and Ozeki. Now, getting to Komusubi or Sekiwake, a lot of really good wrestlers get to this rank, but Ozeki is the first rank that really has, a gate to it. There have only been probably around 70 Ozeki since 1950. That's the modern sumo era.
And one of the ways that sumo aficionados, the sumo federation, and just sumo fans in general, one of the ways they distinguish, especially for young wrestlers, but also for older, more accomplished wrestlers, one of the ways they distinguish the greats in the sport is if you get to that Ozeki level. Mm-hmm. Once you get that O by your name and by your record, that means something. That means that you have showed that you are consistently a great wrestler in the sport.
Exactly. And so Ozeki, to get to Ozeki, you need to have a record of 33 wins. Generally, it's not required, but generally 33 wins over the past 3 tournaments in those Sanyaku ranks of Komusubi and Sekiwake. And the fact that only 72 people have, since 1950, have gotten that shows to, how sustained your greatness needs to be. That's double-digit wins or more over a 3 tournament period.
Now, we've talked about Ozeki, but this is all preamble to the cream of the crop, the mythical rank. Tell me a little bit about Yokozuna and what makes Yokozuna the top sumo wrestlers in the world of all time.
Right. So obviously we talked about Ozeki, which requires sustained greatness, 33 wins over 2 tournaments. There's one rank that's higher, and Will said it, Yokozuna. Now, Yokozuna, the rank to get promoted to Yokozuna, you have to have even higher levels of greatness. The criteria for promotion is 2 tournament championship victories in a row or equivalent. So not always, but most Yokozuna get 2 tournament wins in a row, and that's from the rank of Ozeki. If you had 1 tournament win as a Komusubi, as a Sekiwake, then you got promoted to Ozeki and you won another, doesn't matter. You must have 2 tournament wins in a row as a Ozeki.
So that means in 30 matches, you have to beat 39 other wrestlers over a span of what, like 6 months?
Yeah, yeah, over 4 months. Tournaments every 2 months. So you have to, in a 4-month period, beat out 39 other wrestlers in the top division to get those 2 tournament wins in a row. And oftentimes, you'll be going against other Ozeki, other great wrestlers, or even other Yokozuna to get that privilege. And so in the history, all time of sumo, there have only been 72 Yokozuna ever. This is since, like, ancient times. There are even mythical Yokozuna from, like, the 1800s.
Sure. So now we've kind of talked about the structure of, generally what we're going to be talking about in terms of present-day sumo. But we're also going to be getting into some more larger topics about what is sumo, what are the different aspects of sumo. The first thing I think we should talk about is we keep focusing on the main, higher levels. Mm-hmm. But how do kids get into sumo? How do teens get into sumo? There's kind of 2 routes that the average sumo wrestler goes through. If you could tell me a little bit about one of the college routes, I'll actually talk a little bit more about the amateur routes.
Yeah. So, I mean, college sumo is a thing. It's like college basketball, college football. Organized sumo is a thing, especially in Japan, for the youth. And so in colleges, there are college sumo teams. And so there have been a bunch of notable college sumo wrestlers. It's more common in the modern era rather than the past, but some notable college sumo wrestlers have been Asanoyama, Shodai. He was a college yokozuna, and so obviously there's other examples, but one big thing to note is that for college and high school, if you're a college or a high school yokozuna, that gives you the right to skip the lower levels of sumo. So there are 6 levels in sumo, and if you are like the best sumo wrestler in college or high school, you can skip all the way to the 3rd division when you're starting pro sumo.
And that's huge because we talked about how the process of moving up through divisions. Mm-hmm. It's tedious and you have to be successful all the time. So if you can show as a college sumo wrestler that you're dominant, the Sumo Federation kind of looks at that as your stamp of approval that you can compete at the highest levels already.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, sumo at a young age, many young kids in Japan don't just get into sumo. Sumo is something that part of it is your body type, part of it is the influence around you or who you know. We'll be talking about Akebono in our Time as a Dohyo segment, and he was kind of scouted by a former sumo wrestler. And that's how a lot of kids get into sumo. Another way is they could just have an interest in the body for it. For example, I taught in a school in Japan, and in my school there was like the sumo kid. Mm-hmm. And it was weird because all the teachers called him the sumo kid. It was really, it was his identity almost. Right. And he moved all the way from southern Japan just to do sumo in this stable in my prefecture. Yeah. And, when you get a kid at that young age, imagine moving your child from, let's just say, like, California all the way to New York to like, do something. That's a lot, like, much of the sacrifice that Japanese families and families from abroad, from Mongolia and other places like that, what they do to, make their kids or to allow their kids to have a career in sumo.
Yeah, there's a lot in common with like sumo and like youth with like Americans and families, chasing professional sports here. Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, we've been talking about sumo as a Japanese sport, and I gave the example of my student who moved from southern Japan to go to kind of more central Japan just to be a sumo wrestler. How about when people go from around the world to come to Japan? What do they have to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. A couple of like the great wrestlers right now, are not Japanese. They're like international. And so I don't know all of their stories off the top of my head, but Hakuho, he's the son of a Olympian from Mongolia. But from a young age, he knew he wanted to do sumo. And so when he was 14, he sent a letter to some stable masters in Japan. So stable masters are like the head coaches. They're like the guys who preside over.
And they kind of hold the keys to sumo at large.
Yeah.
A stable master has to accept you, and once you're in a stable, it's like a family, a brotherhood.
Yeah.
And they kind of cultivate your talent, and so to be accepted into a stable is a huge deal.
Yeah. And for context, when you're starting out in sumo, like you don't just like live with your parents and train. When you're in a sumo stable, you live inside the sumo stable, you sleep with your sumo brothers, and it's not like you have individual rooms. You're all sleeping in the same room under the same roof, sharing the same meals.
You're saying
it's
they share
a
bunk
lifestyle.
beds?
No, they don't share bunk beds. It's just like
bunk beds?
it's like tatami.
Okay.
Yeah, they're like, think like sleeping beds right next to each other.
Yeah, I gotta say there has to be some company in Japan who has like hit the market of like the large tatami mat, because I like stayed in Japan, and I swear to God, the tatami mats that I stayed in, they're pretty narrow. I'm like 6'3", so I'm a pretty big guy. I can't imagine someone that's my height but also like 400 pounds trying to get on like a standard tatami mat.
Right. And not everyone starts that size, because Hakuho himself, he was pretty small. He came to Japan, he was probably like, 5'8", 150 pounds, and then he grew into the monster he is today. 6'3", 340, with like an absolute perfect body for sumo.
Yeah, and you don't have to have the exact perfect body for sumo others. There's quite a few, there's 3 or 4 wrestlers at the main level who are under 300 pounds. There's even a wrestler who, last tournament got down all the way to like 202 pounds.
Right, yeah. Enho, small guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Hakuho, he basically got into a sumo stable by like sending letters. Someone took a chance on him, and invited him into the stable, and he just grew from there. Absolute greatest guy ever. He had to send a piece of mail. No one is scouting. Well, actually now people might be scouting in Mongolia, but back when he started, I'm sure, they didn't have people going to Mongolia scouting for sumo talent. So he had to reach out himself.
Now, some of the best wrestlers, from my knowledge, are from Mongolia. There's also a Hawaiian sumo tradition. Right now, one of your favorite wrestlers, Tochinoshi, and he's from Georgia, right?
Yeah, and not the U.S. state.
We're not talking about, We're talking about the Georgia and the Beatles song, right?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of sumo wrestlers. Well, there's a handful, but the sumo wrestlers who aren't from Japan, they tend to make an impact. So, well, we've been talking a lot about like context, historical context, recent context. But if you're a sumo fan getting into sumo right now, what are some storylines that you could follow?
Yeah, well, one of the first things I'd look at is the Akibasho, which is the fall tournament. The fall tournament was really exciting. It was the second tournament that came after the spring tournament was canceled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so spring tournament.
It was the May tournament.
It was the May tournament. Then we watched the July tournament. That's when I got into it. And then the most recent tournament has been the fall tournament. Shodai won that tournament, and we're going to be talking more about Shodai and his specific styles and his kind of background. But he is kind of the pole leader. He's the guy who sumo is talking about right now.
Yeah. And off the strength of that tournament win, he was actually in the Sekiwake slot that we spoke about earlier. So that tournament win pushed him to 32 wins, and because he had that tournament win, instead of needing 33, the council decided to promote him to Ozeki. And so right now, he's one of 3 Ozeki. So the 3 Ozeki are Shodai and Asanoyama, and those 2 guys are belt sumo guys. And so there are 2 main styles in sumo. And so belt is usually referred to more as like an elegant, more refined style.
Kind of more more technical.
Yeah, more technical, more skilled. The reason for that is just because there's so many different ways you can use the belt to win. You can lift your opponent out. You can do throws. Basically, there's a world of possibilities for belt wrestlers.
And I have to say, belt wrestling, when I first started watching sumo, that was the first style of wrestling that really caught my eye.
Yeah, mine too.
It really reminded me of how like offensive linemen in football use their hands. It also kind of reminded me of like a dance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like fencing. I've never watched fencing, but when I see your prototypical image on like a hoity-toity insurance commercial or something, that like dance.
Yeah.
I like that movement, that rhythm, and the best belt wrestlers. Like I said with Hakuho, I'm not sure if he's a belt wrestler or not, but the best belt wrestlers, they make it look easy, even though it's extremely difficult.
Right. Yeah. And so, these two belt guys, these two belt Ozeki, are sort of contrasted by the other Ozeki, Taka Keisho. We like to call him the, like, meatball hamster. Like, he is 5'9", 400 pounds, and a complete wrecking ball. So he's the other styles, and that would be, like, push or thrusting sumo. And so he got to the second highest rank Ozeki just behind the force of his pushes and tachiai.
And with the differences in skill, sumo wrestlers build their training and build their bodies around the different skills that they're trying to exhibit. We talked about in the last tournament, Asano Yama. We felt that his focus and perhaps his training going into the Akibasho, differed from what he did in the previous tournament, because we could just tell that he was using this kind of different style. And so as you get into sumo and as you start watching sumo, you'll see almost tournament to tournament the focus of the individual sumo wrestlers on how they're trying to. I mean, some people are really consistent. Some people show you the same style every time, but you're wrestling almost the same 40 wrestlers with a few people coming in and out of the top ranks almost every tournament. And so it's almost like when you play the same opponent, you can't use the same tricks every time. So sometimes you have to show something different. But that's kind of a give and take, because sometimes you can go away from what makes you successful and go away from your style.
Yeah. And so those are the two big styles, pushing and belt. Pushing is like more consistent just because you're trying to push the opponent out. You're just using your arms. You're not really doing that much belt action. It's just pure force. And so I think personally there's a little bit less variance there, although you will see pushers have varying tournaments, but the objective is very much the same almost all the time.
Yeah, and I'd say almost a third style, and it's not really a style, but I'd say something that some of the sumo wrestlers do is, they're almost like they focus on the transferal of energy. So there's some wrestlers who, regardless of whether they're belt or they're push, their real objective is to use kind of a head-on force and to redirect it.
Yeah, and so like that's like something like where like Asano Yama, like he's trying to do like a show of force, dominate his opponents. A wrestler like Shodai, he does more of that redirection style where he'll take an opponent's energy and be more defensive with it rather than just trying to dominate.
And so we would suggest when you get into watching sumo, look for the style of these wrestlers. And I mean, I think just any person who starts watching sumo, they kind of gravitate towards a certain style. So I would look for that and try to see, because then you can almost, have your favorite wrestlers based on the type of sumo that you like, which that'll really get you into the sport.
Yeah. One of the best things about sumo is, picking your guys and sticking with them, seeing them win, seeing them grow up, or, even seeing them lose. Nothing is more exciting than, seeing the growth of your wrestlers. And of course, not all wrestlers are going to be winning all the time, but
right.
That's what makes the sports exciting. You don't know who's going to win.
Right. So we kind of got off on a tangent because we love talking about the different styles, really attracted with that. But we're going to kind of get back to, if you're watching sumo right now, what should you be watching for? And one of the big rivalries that's kind of coming up in the sport with the absence of Hakuho, and we'll talk about more. We'll probably even do a bioblast on Hakuho in the next couple episodes because he's kind of the preeminent modern sumo wrestler.
Yeah, all other sumo wrestlers right now are in the shadow of Hakuho. They're chasing him.
Yeah, but one of the people that could be, although we'll see with his health, because I have my own views by him. But there's this sumo wrestler called Teru no Fuji, and he's from Mongolia, just like Hakuho. And he's kind of the foil to Asano Yama, because Asano Yama is
young,
kind of
up-and-coming guy,
young upcoming from Japan.
Yeah,
and the Japanese Sumo Federation really wants him to be a yokozuna. They want him to be in that mythical stature, but he didn't get to that stature because Teruno Fuji beat him in the July tournament, right?
Yes, the July tournament.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things we're going to be watching is kind of Asanoyama's quest to be a Yokozuna, which he has to win 2 straight tournaments because Shodai won the last one.
Mm-hmm.
And then also kind of his, I'm not sure if it's a rivalry yet, but definitely the...
a foil.
Yeah, a foil in the international wrestler Teruno Fuji.
Yeah, Asanoyama, young guy, new to the rank, Japanese. Teruno Fuji, Mongolian, ex-Ozeki. He actually got demoted, went all the way, I think, to the second lowest rank of Jonidan.
Wow.
Demoted all the way down there and just got back to the top division.
Now, Jonidan, for other people, that's like double A or...
No, I would say that's even single A baseball.
Single A baseball?
Single A baseball.
Kind of equivalent? Okay.
Yeah. Single A.
Now, one of the other kind of currents is, just like any athlete, there are injuries. And when you are, when this sport's such an individual sport and you have to keep winning to keep your rank, injuries are a huge deal. One of the, and we talk about Hakuho a lot, and he's one of the people who's really been beset by injuries lately. And also some of the wrestlers like Ishiura. Ishiura is one of those smaller wrestlers I talked about. He's a, 260?
Yeah, 260.
250?
5'9".
And so when he gets, he doesn't have that power. Some wrestlers we watched last tournament, some wrestlers are so big, they can even get a couple wins even when they're injured.
Yeah.
Right? But a guy like Ishiura, it's hard to win when your force is not, you're more of a belt guy, you're more of a redirect guy. It's really hard to win when you're injured. And so we've been kind of watching Ishiura, seeing how he's coming back from injury.
Right, and so we can actually kind of contrast injuries too, because injuries in sumo are so important. You'll actually see that the 2 Yokozuna right now, Hakuho and Kakaryu, they probably are completing 50% of the tournaments right now. So in a 6 tournament year, they'll miss 3, or they'll withdraw from 3, right? And so that's kind of a special privilege Yokozuna have, because Yokozuna can't, once you get promoted to Yokozuna, you can't get demoted. So Yokozuna, they can take a tournament off and not worry about their rank at all. Of course, there are other considerations. So there's something called the Yokozuna Deliberation Council. And if a Yokozuna isn't producing good enough results, they'll essentially force you into retirement.
I bet you a lot of MLB owners, maybe the Angels would want Albert Pujols, or maybe the Yankees, when A-Rod was going downhill, they would have loved a council like that just to say, hey, you need to retire.
Yeah. And so, even though they have this special privilege, they have to watch it, right? But that still doesn't take away the fact that they can miss whole tournaments and not worry about it, right? Yeah. For a wrestler like Ishiura at Maegashira, no other rank has the privilege of being able to miss a tournament like that. If you're at Maegashira 12 like Ishiura was and you miss a whole tournament, that's minus 15. So whereas if you have an 8-7 record, that's +1, +1 spot. Missing all 15 matches loses you 15 spots. And so that's almost always going to be a demotion to second division or another division down if you're not in the top division.
Well, Michael brought up a good point about the spots. We're also going to be talking about, whichever podcast we make that's after the reveal of what spots that...
the ranking chart.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the ranking chart, going a little in depth about what it means, especially in the first couple episodes where they release those charts, and we're going to be talking about it. We'll kind of explain it to you in a way where you can kind of see what's going on the chart, and we'll also probably put it on our Twitter. And that's another thing we haven't plugged. We'll talk about at the end of the show, but we'll be releasing a lot of stuff on Twitter, and then also through all of our different podcasts.
Yeah, engage with us on Twitter, please.
Yeah. The last kind of through line, the last thing that you should start with is maybe like I did. I picked Koto Eko. Now, he's not exactly a young up-and-comer. He's kind of a middle, not middle-aged, but he's 28.
Yeah, he's an older rank and file.
Older rank and file. I kind of chose him. I don't know why. I just did.
He's like a muscle man.
Yeah. I guess I love muscle man. I don't know if it's a kink or what. But, they're all kind of big, so whatever. But yeah, he's kind of a bigger... you can see the muscle coming out of his arms. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking about that. What I wanted to say was, if you're looking into sumo, you should really start getting into the up-and-comers. because it's going to be, I think, most exciting for someone who gets into sumo to kind of pick a horse and ride with it, especially one that's been successful lately.
Right.
And we both have wrestlers that we've been looking at that have been really impressive as of late. The wrestler that I've really took to is a wrestler called Tobi Zaru. One, love the name. Tobi plus Zaru, dope name.
It's like Flying Monkey.
Yeah, and this dude, he, I don't know what it is. He he came on the scene last tournament. He was like moving fools like I haven't seen too many sumo wrestlers move fools.
Yeah, and he's more of like a lightweight but like muscly guy.
Yeah, I mean that dude is, again, the muscly guys. I don't know what it is. I like a muscly man. But anyways, Michael, what kind of up and comer have you been?
Yeah. So like right now I'm really following Kota Shoho. He's a young guy. So whereas like Tobi Zaru, he's 28, but like last tournament was his first tournament in the top division. He's kind of been floating around third and second division for a long time.
He's kind of been like a journeyman.
Yeah, he's kind of been like a journeyman.
And now he got a shot and he's killing it.
Yeah, he looked really good last tournament, fighting even like higher ranked guys. So I think he has a bright future. But sort of contrasting, his like older, more journeymanness. The guy I've been following is this guy Kota Shoho. He's 21, young guy, baby face, and he looks the part. He has the size, probably 6'2", 330 pounds right now, probably a little heavier. But, fighting in the lower ranks, he had a little injury issues. But, when he's fighting other guys, he looks like he's a step ahead of everyone. Belt guy, but he can do some pushing too if he needs to. Bright blue belt, bright baby face. I think he's the future.
Now, on our Twitter, with the 3 segments that we're going to do in the next part of this podcast, as well as Tobi Zaru and Koto Shoho, we're going to kind of put a little like clip, and maybe I might put a link to a YouTube video. So if you're like, okay, who are these people? How do I spell their name? Like, what is a kind of giving you an entry point into who these people are. I'll put that on the Twitter the week that we release the podcast.
Right, because, we can talk about this, like, all we want, but really the best way to learn about sumo is just watch sumo. So, we'll share videos, there are plenty of awesome content creators. NHK World has a great series called Sumopedia that you can watch to learn, the ins and outs of sumo. Please watch those, learn more about sumo, and, learn with us. We're the supplement. We can be your guys who you're learning sumo with.
And also, we really want to go onto Twitter because we don't want to be this archaic podcast that's just talking about sumo in this kind of nebulous format, like a vacuum. We want to have, something where we're also interacting and showing our interaction and also interacting with you listeners about sumo. So that kind of this is like an interactive process. And we'll talk about that more at the end of the show, but we just wanted to kind of stress that. All right, everybody. For our first segment of our first episode, we're going to be doing the first segment, Time is a Dohyo. This segment is going to really be focused on the history of sumo wrestlers and kind of sumo wrestlers through the past, so you can kind of get a historical context of where sumo came from, so you can better understand what sumo is today. Today I'm going to be talking about Akebono Taro, otherwise known as Chadwick Rowan. Chadwick Rowan was born in Hawaii in 1969. He joined sumo in 1988, and he quickly rose through the ranks. He won 2 straight tournaments in fall of 92 and winter of 93, and he became the first non-Japanese wrestler to make the top rank, Yokozuna. One of the things that's most recognizable about Akebono Taro is that he's one of the tallest and heaviest wrestlers ever, at 6'8", 514 pounds. Whoa. He had a really illustrious career, and he retired in 2001. Now I'm going to get into some more inside info. Why should you be interested about Akebono Taro? Who is this man? The first thing that I think is really noticeable about him is his name. Now, if you don't know Japanese, obviously you wouldn't know this, but his Japanese name, Akebono Taro, which is given to him when he starts doing sumo in Japan, means beginning and thick sun. So Akebono Taro was really, it's almost poetic. he was the beginning of the international movement of wrestlers coming to Japan in sumo. And he is a thick son. A thick SOB, in my opinion. But how did he get interested in sumo if he was the first international sumo wrestler? Well, he got interested in sumo in Hawaii after quitting his college basketball scholarship, which is a very unconventional path. But if you think about it, and there's been a lot of research lately, that if you start with sports and build the foundation with other sports, you can actually be successful in sports that you don't have a training in. His basketball training, that movement, that knee movement, that like strength within his legs really helped him out because he's so heavy. He should be a top-heavy wrestler, but he's so athletic and agile that he was able to be really successful. He got interested in sumo through watching television, and he was introduced through a family friend to the leader of his stable in Japan. One of the most interesting things about Akebono, besides his success, he was a kind of a world-class sumo wrestler for about 10 years, 10, 15 years at the height of his success. And one of the most interesting things about him is after he was retired, he did some wrestling in the States, he did some MMA, but he really kind of went back to his roots, and he wanted to make sumo more accessible. That's one of his lasting legacies. He did an interview with Inside Sport Japan, and I'll put the link on our Twitter. But he talked about how he sees the longevity of sumo turning towards amateur sumo cultivation. And we'll talk about that more in future episodes, but there is this kind of, hole in the amateur sumo cultivation process. And Akebono really wanted to make more tournaments accessible, marketable, and geared towards attracting young wrestlers. He wants to make a career in sumo more accessible. One concrete solution that he kind of provided in the interview was that he said he wants to open it up for everyone. Whoever wants to join a sumo stable should. And he's really talking about he wants more international wrestlers to be less limits on, and we'll talk about this more later as well. There's kind of these limits on the number of international wrestlers that can be in a stable at one time. And he wants to kind of restructure that. He says that there's not enough space for everyone who wants to do sumo. So Mike, with this in mind, why do you think I chose Akebono as my first sumo wrestler I wanted to profile?
Well, I think Akebono is kind of a natural choice. He was the first foreign yokozuna, so like non-Japanese yokozuna. Sumo, very Japanese sport. All these terms are in Japanese. Very Japanese tradition based in religion and tradition. And he was the first international guy, and moreover, first American to be a yokozuna. So for Sumo Night in America, a lot. Not for us specifically, but a lot of people in America probably started watching sumo when they saw Akebono getting coverage on ESPN.
And especially in Hawaii, because the only other real American wrestlers, or American, they're culturally Hawaiian, but the only Hawaiian wrestlers, came after him. He was the one that kind of opened the gates to sumo wrestling in America, and more specifically Hawaii.
Yeah, I'll let me pump the brakes on that a little bit, because there were a couple of people before him. So he spoke about it. His stable master, Takamiyama, he was a guy from Hawaii. He's wrestled in the 70s. He reached the third highest rank of Sekiwake, even won a tournament. And even though he didn't reach, the grand champion levels of Ozaki or Yokozuna, he was, a pioneer in recruiting Chadwick, Akebono. And then there was another guy too, Konishiki, also from Hawaii. He reached the second highest rank of Ozaki and won like a handful of tournaments, I want to say 4 or 5. And so Akebono was not the first American wrestler, but he was really the first one who reached, those like even like fairy tale heights of Yokozuna.
And I'm really glad you make that clarification, because what I really meant was that, when you're talking about the kind of popularity or perhaps the impressions of sumo, he's the first guy, I think, in America who you would perhaps know his name if you were anywhere tangentially removed from, or like connected to sumo.
Yeah, like not for like our generation, but for an older generation. If you said sumo wrestling and You said, can you name one guy? The people who could name someone would probably name Akebono.
Yeah. Now, Michael, what do you think his lasting legacy in the world of sumo is?
Yeah, I think obviously the biggest thing, being the first foreign yokozuna is huge because, in the history of Japan, he was like, I think the 58th yokozuna.
Yeah.
There are a total of 72. He was the first foreign one and not the last because there have been a good handful, mostly Mongolian, one other American guy. But, he literally opened the gates for non-Japanese folk to be at that, fairy tale highest rank.
Yeah.
And then another thing too is like even beyond like the distinction of being Japanese or not Japanese and Japaneseness and what that means being yokozuna. I want to say he was probably like the last great push thruster sumo wrestler that actually got yokozuna. Almost every single other yokozuna belt guys. Sheer size alone and force alone don't make you a championship consistent wrestler unless you're 6'8" and 500 pounds.
So basically what we're saying is you need to watch some Akebono YouTube videos ASAP.
A literal force of nature.
The first time I saw his videos, I audibly was like, wow. Oh my God. This dude is a beast.
Yeah. So, he literally a physical anomaly. Like one of the greatest physical specimens in the history of sumo.
All right, Michael. That's enough for this segment. That was great. Next time we're going to be getting into... Who are we going to get into?
Yeah, so for this next segment, it's our Inside the Stable segment, and so I'm going to be bringing you a little bit of inside knowledge from a stable I chose. And so a stable, there are 44 stables in sumo right now, and you can sort of think of them like teams, but sumo isn't really a team sport.
It's almost like training grounds. They're kind of where they're like the housing.
Yeah.
For a certain amount of sumo wrestlers that from all different ranks.
Yeah. I mean, you could think of it like a sumo club, right? I don't know how it is in tennis, but like let's say a bunch of tennis people are sponsored by Nike and some are sponsored by Adidas. They all get, their gear and stuff from one company, but they're individually competing.
Or almost like soccer youth clubs. Mm-hmm. Like when you're like a really high talent, let's just say in like Spanish soccer, you might get picked up by the, Real Madrid youth team when you're 12. And like that's your team that you play with. Now the only difference is that all these people are different ages. So in one stable, there's a whole range of skill sets. Anyways.
Yeah. Exactly. So anyways, the stable that I am going to talk about is called Shikihide Beya. And so Beya or Heya, it's the Japanese word for stable. But this stable is very unique because they don't have any sekitori. And what sekitori means is top 2 division salaried wrestler. So for the bottom 4 divisions, sumo wrestlers, they're in professional sumo, but they don't get paid a salary. They get a stipend for every tournament they participate in, but that's once every 2 months. When you're in the top 2 divisions, that's Juryo and Makuchi, which is the top division. Wrestlers get a salary, they get paid every month. It's basically the difference between, being, just a guy and being in the elite. And so there are 44 stables, so not every stable has a sekitori, but Shikihide Beya is very unique because they don't even have a guy in the 3rd highest division of Makushita. So their highest wrestlers are in the 4th division of Sandanme, and they only have 2, which is kind of funny. Well, I'm not a baseball guy, but what would it be like in Major League Baseball if you were a scout and none of your prospects that you scouted and told the organization, hey, get this guy? What would it be like if none of the guys that you picked got past AA ball?
Yeah, your team would be brutal. You would not have any future talent. You would not have any hopes for the future. Your team, once your star talent left, they'd be gone. Except in this stable, there's no star talent to begin with. There's just nobody.
Yeah.
This stable is kind of like the barren wasteland of sumo a little bit.
Yeah. And so they have a couple of kind of funny stories, or notable stories even. So they are home to this one wrestler. His name is Hattori Zakura. And so when you think of like sumo wrestlers and starting sumo, you think most people would go in, at least be able to get some wins and have a bright future.
I mean, they're in the top level. They should be able to win some matches.
Right, it's pro sumo, right? Yeah. But this guy Hattori Zakura, it's kind of comical how much he's not succeeded. So in his career, he's had 206 matches. 206 matches. He's lost 202.
Is that bad?
Yeah, that's pretty bad. When you have 202 losses and only 3 wins, I don't know if you should be doing pro sumo, but he's still there. He's been doing sumo for 5 years.
Hey, he has 1 withdrawal. That means that after, maybe after 50 losses, you would be, maybe dejected. Maybe I should choose a new profession. He's gone through 206 matches of almost straight, consecutive, non-stop losing, and he's only withdrawn once. So there's a silver lining there.
Okay? Yeah, there's some grit. He has some grit. Not any grit for, consistent victory, but the fact that he's still going grit. In and out, competing, that's something to, cheer about. But yeah, he's a very unique case study in, historical futility. He hasn't had a win since January of 2019. Like, if you feel like we've been in the coronavirus pandemic for forever, this guy hasn't had a win for 2 times that.
I just hope his personal life is better than his sumo life. That's all I can say.
Well, I mean,
he's having a tough corona period. If this is the case.
Yeah, it's sorry to break the news to you, but Shikihide Beya is also known for this sort of scandal that happened where about half their wrestlers ran away from the stable because the stable master's wife was training them too hard. So literally half of them left. Who knows where they went, if they stayed at a hotel, stayed with family. They literally left and protested. They filed a complaint with the Sumo Association because the stable master's wife was training them too hard. And she was only training them because...
I mean, was she wrong though? Because they kind of suck.
I don't know if she's wrong, and some other guys have commented that maybe she's doing better training than the stable master, and she was only training them because the stable master has been ill, so he hasn't been able to train them as much. So what does it say when the stable master's wife is
I
taking
think
charge?
That's just a phenomenon in the workplace. A boss is on leave, but there's this kind of thought that they'll be back, and then the new boss rocks the boat. She may have rocked the boat too hard. But it's a sinking ship, so perhaps you should have rocked it.
yeah. But, the wrestlers are too used to, having it be a nice and comfortable, environment, so they made a complaint. And I just want to acknowledge on this, for the first time I heard about, this runaway deal was on the Sumo YouTube channel by Chris Sumo. He makes amazing content, and he makes original content. He reports on the news, but he also goes to events and makes his own original content. So highly recommend checking him out, Chris Sumo on YouTube.
And that's a good point, Mike. We're not getting our information out of thin air. All the stuff we're collecting is easily searchable. Usually we just kind of put the name, or we go to content creators who give us kind of an avenue to look up more stuff. So again, if you ever hear anything and you're really intrigued by it, just type it into Google. There's some sort of resource for it, and there's great content creators. We're kind of piecing a lot of stuff in the sumo world into one podcast, but there are many creators who are giving more deep dive and videos and commentary on more specific things you might be interested in as well.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to get to our third segment, the Mawashi Deep Dive. Michael, what is the Mawashi?
So the Mawashi, that's the belt that sumo wrestlers wear.
Do they wash it? That's my next question.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So they do wash Mawashi, but only in very specific conditions. So you can wash a Mawashi the very first time you buy it. Before you wear it, you wash it. The second time you can wash a Mawashi is if your stable master dies.
Wow. So maybe after 5 or 6 years, not saying you'd want your stable master to die, but if it got really stinky, you might be like, hey, might be time, buddy.
Thankfully for most wrestlers, you can buy a new belt. The Sumo Association sells them. You can buy a new belt for $10. For guys in the top division, it's a little bit more expensive, but you get help from your supporters club. Each sumo wrestler has a fan club once you get that in high rank, and they'll pay for your new belt.
I really appreciate you taking it down that road because I was going to get really dark. There might have been some conspiracy theories, some plotting. Especially, you get a guy like Akebono, 500 pounds, right in that Mawashi dude. I would not want to be in that towel room.
Yeah.
Afterwards. Anyways, so the Mawashi deep dive is a deep dive into a current wrestler. And again, this may be an avenue into a wrestler that you could be really interested in. If anything we talk about these wrestlers week by week, interests you, you can just go right into kind of learning more about them and maybe becoming their fan. Or their fan girl.
Yeah.
There is kind of this phenomenon, sumo fangirls in Japan.
Yeah, for the more handsome guys, there'll be people like waiting outside their stables, asking for their hand in marriage.
Wow. All right. So for this Mawashi deep dive, we're going to be focusing on Shodai. Now, if you remember, Shodai was the winner of the Akibasho in September.
Yeah.
He was born in
Uto.
He was born in Uto, Kumamoto, on November 5th, 1991. Now, people might know what Kumamoto is, right?
Yeah. Kumamoto, it's the place where the local character Kumamon is from. That black bear with the red cheeks, very cartoony.
Cute.
Yeah, cute guy. He's not actually a bear. He's a hardworking salaryman, but that's another thing.
I mean, he could be a bear in another circumstance, in another part of his life, and still be a hardworking salaryman. We don't kink shame on this podcast. Anyways, so Shodai is 6 feet and a half, 375 pounds. So, if you think of Akebono, 6'8", 500, it might be a little bit more proportional. Shodai's got more of your traditional sumo size.
Yeah, you'll see a lot more wrestlers like him. He's sort of the around the sumo average.
Now, we talked about, the history of Hakuho writing a letter and joining a stable. Shodai took a route that quite a few Japanese wrestlers do. He wrestled sumo in middle school and high school, and he won the Youth National Sumo Championship in high school. So he was the best sumo wrestler in all of Japan at his age level. Then he went on to wrestle in college. He became a college yokozuna, and like we said before, kind of gave him the golden ticket to professional sumo.
Right. And sort of going off that, he sort of took an interesting path from college sumo, because normally if you become a college yokozuna, you can get that pass to Makushita, the 3rd division, right away. But Shodai, he became the college yokozuna his sophomore year. And so that pass only lasts for 1 year. He decided he wanted to finish his college degree, so he actually stayed his junior year. He didn't become the yokozuna. Stayed his senior year, didn't become the college yokozuna. So when he finally got into professional sumo, obviously the stable still wanted to recruit him. He actually didn't start from the 3rd division. He started all the way from the lowest 6th division.
Yeah, so I mean, even though he was, he was the best sumo wrestler in Japan at like multiple ages.
Mm-hmm.
But, he still had to start in that lower rank, which, he's had a lot of success recently, and perhaps, that hard work that he's put in, he's seasoned, he's experienced, he can go through adversity. He's just a great sumo wrestler. He's currently in the To Kitsukaze stable,
mm-hmm.
and his rank is Sekewake number 1. Now, that might change, right?
Oh, yeah. So since he won the tournament, and he's been in Sanyaku for the past 3 tournaments, and he's had a very good record, 32 wins over the past 3 tournaments with a tournament win from Sanyaku, having that record will promote you to Ozeki, usually. And, his confirmation, it was confirmed that he is going to be promoted to Ozeki.
So I got a quick confirmation question for you,
mm-hmm.
Mike. So let's say you win the tournament,
mm-hmm.
and you get promoted to Ozeki. If you win another tournament, does that count as the 2 straight tournaments for Yokozuna promotion?
It doesn't.
Okay.
As soon as you become Ozeki, your previous record does not matter when it comes to Yokozuna promotion. You need to have 2 tournaments in a row as Ozeki to get to Yokozuna.
So if Shodai started as Sekiwake in the Akibasho, he could, in theory, get to Yokozuna within the next, 4 months.
Yeah, if he wins both tournaments, he'll get Yokozuna.
Cool. All right, so I've kind of talked about the context and a little bit more about more of a bio blast about Shodai. Michael's going to get into his techniques, and that's what we're going to do on this segment. Is we're going to get into what kind of techniques does he do, and how does he wrestle.
Yeah, so Shodai, he's definitely more of a belt wrestler. So he it's called Yotsuzumo. When you wrestle on the belt, he's less of a power guy, although he definitely has power when he wants to. But in a lot of his matches, you'll see that he'll be more redirecting the energy of the other sumo wrestler. If you watch Shodai at the Tachi-ai, he kind of has a different Tachi-ai. So a lot of sumo wrestlers' Tachi-ai is sort of head first, lower center of gravity. Shodai actually stands up straighter on his Tachi-ai, which makes it so that when a wrestler who's shorter than him or has a lower stance, instead of hitting them going shoulder to shoulder, it's the other sumo wrestler's head going into Shodai's chest. And with his size, he's able to absorb that.
And that Tachi-ai, that first meeting is super important. It's kind of what sets the tone for the whole match. And remember, these matches can be, a couple seconds to a minute or two. And his Tachi-ai, you'd think looking at it that it isn't successful, but like Michael said, he just is always able to, take the energy from the wrestler that's meeting him at the Tachi-ai and redirect it to give him the advantage.
Right. And so, it's kind of interesting because, and we talked about this earlier in the podcast, but contrasting, other wrestlers' styles, whereas, Asanoyama is also a belt guy, but, he's the one who's controlling, the force of the match. He's trying to exert himself and his power on other wrestlers. You have Shodai, who's more, he's the type of guy who's going to take what you give him, and then he'll make some soup out of that.
So I got one question for you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me and you, how do we see Shodai's trajectory? Maybe in the next, 3 or 4 matches, could he make Yokozuna? Do you think he's going to stay in Ozeki?
Yeah, looking at his age, Shodai, I think he's 29. He's going to be 29 soon. 28 right now. He's had a very recent spate of success. So there's always going to be a little bit of luck when it comes to getting promoted in certain ranks. I am not sold on Shodai as a Yokozuna. I think he'll be a serviceable Ozeki. But since I started watching last year, the very first tournament I watched, he went 3-12. And so, even for, other Ozeki promotees, they don't have, a big stain on their record like that where they went 3-12 and they participated in all their matches. So what we have yet to see, obviously he's shown consistency recently.
Around the last year or so.
Yeah. But, even then, it's not a full year of, sustained success.
The last 10 months.
Yeah, the last 10 months. So, I think he'll be serviceable as an Ozeki. Yokozuna, I don't know. Usually for Yokozuna, they're the type of guys like Asanoyama who exert their will on other people.
Now wait. You talk about the guys like Asanoyama who exert their will. Asanoyama, he might be the kind of Japanese golden boy for sumo wrestling.
Right.
But this is again a topic for another episode, but I'm not so sold on Asanoyama.
Right. And so, this is going away from Shodai, but I think let me preface this. Asanoyama, when he's on, he's the type of guy who, when he wins, undoubtedly he was going to win from the start. Now, he always isn't on that level, right? He's the type of guy that we've seen, make some very simple mental mistakes, look very slow coming out of the Tachi-ai. So, Asanoyama has the physical traits definitely to do it, but, mentally he's not there where he's, exerting his force with his mental game.
And to kind of jump off that's why I think I have more of an optimistic forecast for Shodai. I think, maybe Yokozuna, I'm not sure, but I think that he is going to be one of the top wrestlers for the foreseeable future. And of course now he's already Ozeki, so I could say that easily, and so can Michael. But I think that he's going to be an Ozeki with the potential to be a Yokozuna, especially with Asanoyama kind of struggling, with Hakuho being more injured than he has been in a while more recently, and he's really getting up there in age. And then also, the foil to Asanoyama, Teruno Fuji, that dude's got more injuries than I could even count. He's got a laundry list of injuries. I don't see him being, even though he's battled from the lower ranks, I don't see him exactly being a huge competition longer term for Shodai. So I think Shodai may have a chance to get Yokozuna. We'll see.
My bet, Koto Shoho.
Koto Shoho? Okay. All right. Now the second question, and this is what we're going to do with every single wrestler. And, you know, over the length of this podcast, we're going to be probably hitting almost every major wrestler. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're probably going to compile and put these things so that you'll know kind of where we rank each week. But I'm going to do an interest meter. Mm-hmm. How interested are you in Shodai? 1 to 10.
Yeah. I guess for me, I would say Shodai, I would rate him an 8. You know, I think if you get to Ozeki and you have that consistent success, to get to the second rank, you are a wrestler worth paying attention to. And so, you know, I'm not in love with his, like, you know, wishy-washy style sometimes where he relies more on what the other wrestlers do versus, you know, his own power. But I do think that he's shown some excellent sumo, and anyone getting to the second rank is worth paying attention.
Now, I thought you were going to go like a 6 or a 5. I'm also going to go 8. I'm really excited for him. There's a couple wrestlers like Tobizaru, and I mean, I like Koto Eko, even though I'm not as excited about him being a top wrestler. There's a few more wrestlers that I'm interested in, but Shodai is probably one of the top 10 wrestlers that I think I'm most interested in watching match to match during the tournaments. All right, Michael, so that was the end of our segments. We're going to kind of wrap up here. Can you please reiterate kind of our podcast schedule and when there will be new content?
Yeah, so again, we're aiming for episodes every Monday, just for non-tournament times. During the tournament, we're going to be trying to do daily podcasts with recaps of the day's matches, and then, of course, you know, pre-tournament previews, mid-tournament reviews, and sort of like end of tournament, you know, sort of recaps. Awesome. So, again, Mondays, Pacific time, United States, and then daily during tournaments.
Great. You can find us anywhere you can find podcasts. Please subscribe, comment, rate, etc. You know the drill because you're on a podcast.
Yeah, and we also have a Twitter. We have a YouTube. YouTube is Sumo Night in America. Just search us. Twitter is at Sumo Night USA. We'll link the socials in our podcast description, of course. But please interact with us there.
We also have an email, sumonightinamerica@gmail.com. If you want to send in your comments, we might read them on the podcast. And thank you for listening. And that's the first week. Sweet.
Thanks.